ॐ तव कथामृतं तप्तजीवनं कविभिरीडितं तमशापहं श्रवणमङ्गलं श्रीमदाततं भुवि गणन्ति ये भूरिदा जनाः. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to squirt souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome, everyone, to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We're on the chapter Instruction to Vaishnavas and Brahmos, and it's page 307, and we're starting a new day. This is Tuesday, October 16th, 1883. And the conversation earlier included the Balaram's father, Benipal. Father and Benipal, and then others. So a lot of this, just to give a little bit of background, that Balaram's father was visiting, and he wasn't very pleased that Balaram Bose, that Balaram was spending so much time visiting Sri Ramakrishna, because they were very orthodox Vaishnavas, which meant that they had their own community and their own temples and their own rituals and things. And so Sri Ramakrishna, talking to him to try to broaden his view and also to try to smooth things over for Balaram, his beloved disciple, so that he won't be kind of the black sheep of the family, outcast in the family. Sri Ramakrishna was in his room with Rakal, Balaram's father, Benipal, M. Mani Malik, Ishan, Kishori, and other devotees. Master. Liberal-minded devotees accept all the forms of God, Krishna, Kali, Shiva, Rama, and so on. So this was the one complaint against the Vaishnavas, that they weren't liberal to the extent that they would show respect to other traditions and other forms of worship. Sri Ramakrishna is not exactly accusing his father of that, but a little bit there in the background to try to broaden his way of thinking. Balaram's father. Yes, sir. It is like a woman's recognizing her husband, whatever clothes he wears. Now, when we meet Balaram's father and also Balaram's brother, he comes at another time, we find that they're not so, at least the way they present themselves to Sri Ramakrishna, that they're not so narrow-minded. They seem to be good people and everything. But still, they would have been happier if Balaram spent more time with the Vaishnava community and not with Sri Ramakrishna. He still had that reputation of being a Kali worshipper, which they didn't care for very much. Yeah.
Vaishnavas didn't believe in any incarnation of Krishna as well.
The Vaishnavas believed in all of the incarnations, but Krishna was the main one. This is the view actually of the Bhagavata Purana, that Krishna has some special status above and beyond all of the others. There's a series of verses that talk about the number of avatars, and it goes through 10, and then it says there are 24, and then it says asankhya, that there's numberless avatars. And then it says Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, very famous line, but Krishna is Bhagavan himself. So, and you'll remember it was Vaishnav Charan, Satubhai, Vaishnav Charan, who, when he came to the meeting that was arranged, where they tried to decide whether Thakur was an avatar or not, he came a little bit late, and he heard all the evidence and saw Sri Ramakrishna, and then he heard that they had all agreed that yes, Sri Ramakrishna was an avatar. He said, only that much. And he said, but I see he's the source of all avatars. So that goes back to this idea that he'll be Krishna himself reincarnated somehow, rather than just an offshoot, something like that. So yes, they accepted, but they have a special type of nishtha, which is a little bit fanatical. Thakur talks about it also with regard to Hanuman, and we'll get to this idea of nishtha, that of course he recognized Krishna and everything, but Rukmini said, "You better take your form as Rama. Hanuman is coming. That's the way he wants to see you." So, yeah, theoretically, of course, that they'll recognize Rama and Krishna as one and the same and everything, but in their worship, the image will be of Krishna, and usually either baby Gopala or Govinda is the cowherd boy. It's part of the Vrindavan Leela. That would be the main thing. Yeah, we're getting to this now. Master. So Balaram's father. Yes, sir. It is like a woman's recognizing her husband, whatever clothes he wears. Master. But again, there's a thing called nishtha, single-minded devotion. Nishtha, it means that we accept theoretically God can be worshipped in any form, but we have our own special way that we feel comfortable with and we like and we're devoted to and we won't deviate from. And it's through that that we recognize and respect everybody else, but this is we'll be firm in that. So this is that idea of nishtha. Thakur liked that idea. He said we have to have that. It's not like one day worship Rama, one day with Krishna, one day Shiva. We have our own one that we stick to, but we give everyone else the right to have nishtha, that special devotion, to whatever their liking is, whatever their spiritual inclination is. So Thakur says, but again, there's a thing called nishtha, single-minded devotion. When the Gopis went to Mathura, so it'll even reply to Krishna himself. This is interesting. They saw Krishna with a turban on his head. So even between the Krishna of Mathura and the Govinda of Vrindavan, they made a distinction. Their devotion was to the cowherd boy, that their friend, and not to now this fancy guy with the turban and who's the king, future king, and everything. Yeah. Who is this man? Whereas our Krishna, with the peacock feather on his crest and the yellow cloth on his body. Hanuman also had that unswerving devotion. He came to Dwaraka in the cycle of Dwapara. Krishna said to Rukmini, his queen, Hanuman will not be satisfied unless he sees the form of Rama. So to please Hanuman, Krishna assumed the form of Rama. Krishna assumed the form of Rama. But my dear sir, now it's Ramakrishna talking to Balaram's father, I am in a peculiar state of mind. My mind constantly descends from the absolute to the relative and again ascends from the relative to the absolute. What is this called? Bhava Mukha. This was this is a very famous phrase because Thakur heard this. He heard this on 3 different occasions during his period of sadhana. And sometimes we may think that, everything is our own mind telling us things. Even the inspiration, it's our own mind. But sometimes Thakur would hear things, he would have to ask, what does that mean? He wasn't quite sure and everything. So we take this to mean that, this was somehow Divine Mother was communicating with him. He heard this voice in different ways. One time through someone who was known as Rati's mother. This is kind of devotee that used to come there, and all in vision though. And another time, I think a bearded man or something that he heard it from. But the last time was after he was in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for the 6 months. And he said that it was just a voice. It was a formless voice this time, telling him remain in Bhavamukha. And then somehow he understood that this meant the mind should remain in a state just below this samadhi state, Nirvikalpa Samadhi state, but on the threshold, Bhavamukha, on the threshold of some type of ecstatic merging in God, or samadhi, sometimes Nirvikalpa Samadhi, sometimes is a Bhava Samadhi, that state. So that when he looked upward, the mind would go in that direction. He would get merged in samadhi. When he came down a little bit and saw this universe, he would see everything as a manifestation of the divine. So whether the mind was merged in oneness, it was a question of the state of the mind, state or how high it went. When the mind was in that higher state, then everything merged. And so there's no experience there. It's just then he was just merged in the absolute. And when the mind came down a little bit, then he saw a variety, but he saw it as just, he would give different examples, as if seeing artificial fruit made of wax, that he could see this is a banana, this is an apple, this is a pear, but he also knew that it was all one substance. So that was so this kind of going back and forth. He said a little bit like a boat. The sailboat has to tack back and forth unless the wind's directly behind. So he's going from one bank to the other to the other. That's the way they go. So that's how his mind was going, back and forth and back and forth. So when he broke his hand, that was a different realization. That a little bit, yeah. When he broke his arm, Thakur said this was a turning point in his life. He felt that the Divine Mother was sending a message to him, because at that time he had gone into this state of bhava, where he wasn't aware of this external world. And he had a vision of Jagannath, of Puri, and in his mind, in this vision, in this state of bhava, went to embrace him. Now, even though that's that state in bhava, his physical body also did that, and he fell. He said no one was with him at that time, and he was outside near the embankment where the railing was, and everything fell, and he broke his arm. So we can say that after that, he was the mind was tending more to stay on the lower level rather than go to the higher level. If we want to look at it in terms of Bhavamukha, the Divine Mother was saying, okay, you've had enough of this. There's an ecstasy and everything. Now concentrate on this Nara Lila. This other Deva Lila, he's seeing everything in that ecstatic state, not seeing any of this world. World disappears. He's in some state of ecstasy and some deep meditative state and having all types of experiences and things. But when the mind comes down, then he can see this Lila, this human Lila, and see God dwelling within all beings. So that became a little more of the emphasis, or more the nature of his mind after he broke his arm. He went through different stages. And then in Kashipur, towards the end, he used to say that now I find my mind more inclined toward the infinite absolute reality, even beyond formless, even beyond the Divine Mother and everything. That was an indication that he was coming to the end of his life. So he says, but my dear sir, I am in a peculiar state of mind. My mind constantly descends from the absolute to the relative, and again ascends from the relative to the absolute. It doesn't come down to the relative plane the way our mind is dwelling on the relative plane. We see this ordinary world, we accept it for what it is. He saw everything. I don't know how to explain it. We have to have that experience, but either soaked with the consciousness or the embodiment of consciousness, Chidghana, is hard to know exactly what his vision was, of course. But he didn't see things the way we see things, or we don't see things the way he did. That's clear, because his mind never descended below this heart center, he said. He said ordinary people were in the three lower centers. Occasionally we may go there and anything. So his vision was different. Yeah, Thakur understood everything in terms of what level his mind was on. That's why he never talked about any philosophical position as a final position. It depended on his mood and his state of mind and all sorts of other things. So he differed from the philosophers that way, that there was no one doctrine or one school of thought or anything that we can say, oh, he really belonged to that. There's been an attempt to kind of tie him in with the Vishishta Dvaitavadins, partly because of the bell fruit example and everything, and M also seemed to have that idea. But it's completely wrong, I feel, to tie him in with anything because he liked all of them. He liked all of them. He used to say that Divine Mother has given a smorgasbord with all different types of dishes, or that she takes one fish and makes all different preparations of it. Then he would say, "I like all of them. I like all types of preparations of fish," metaphorically speaking. That means he appreciated very much the dualistic point of view and the qualified non-dualism and non-dualism and everything. Only he thought some were more appropriate than others for different people. So the strict Advaita Vedanta, he felt was more for those who had that stern type of renunciation and not much attachment to the world and hadn't entered into family life. So that's why he generally taught the path of devotion. But that doesn't mean that he was a dualist or anything. It depended on his mood personally for him and what was suitable for others when he gave instructions to others. That's why there's Jotoma Totopad. If we restricted as many faiths, so many paths, if we restricted just to the different religions that Thakur taught, I think we miss a very important point. It should be applied to the different schools of Vedanta also, and to the Shakta school as well, and other things. Yeah. The attainment of the absolute is called the knowledge of Brahman, but it is extremely difficult to acquire. A man cannot acquire the knowledge of Brahman unless he completely rids himself of his attachment to the world. So this is what I was saying. This will be the path of Jnana, usually connected with Advaita Vedanta, and involving this perfect detachment. We have to have certain prerequisites for this path that we don't for other paths. Those following the path of devotion, they just have to be sincere and lead a good, pure life to a certain extent, and then gradually everything will fall in line for them. But if we want to start out, I am Brahman, we have to have no attachment to this lower self in ego sense, and so it's a different type of thing. Otherwise, we can get in trouble and make a mess of it, and it won't be helpful for us. When the Divine Mother was born as the daughter of King Himalaya, she showed her various forms to her father. The king said, "I want to see Brahman." Thereupon the Divine Mother said, "Father, if that is your desire, then you must seek the company of a holy man. You must go into solitude, away from the world, and now and then live in holy company." See the distinction, or one distinction, between the path of knowledge and the path of devotion is that the path of knowledge, we start out at the roof. We start out at the end. We start out with a conclusion. We start out with the idea of oneness, and we have to somehow close the gap between our real feeling of duality and this ultimate truth of oneness. The path of devotion, we can start out with anything. We can be complete materialists and everything, and we can think that God is far off in heaven someplace. And as we practice everything, we go step by step by step. Each one is provisional. Each one gets a little closer to what the final goal would be. And we stop thinking of God as far off. Then we realize God dwells within. Then we realize that we're part of that. And ultimately, we may realize that there's no absolute distinction between the individual soul and the Supreme Soul. This is the way Thakur explains it, that even the path of devotion ends in oneness. The strict dualists, they won't go that far. They'll say it ends in state of union. Distinction would put still a state of union. So the path of devotion, we don't have to have a very deep philosophical understanding of the nature of the self or anything like that. We just need a little devotion. And through that itself will bring clarity to the mind and understanding as we practice little by little. The manifold has come from the one alone, the relative from the absolute. So this is why we can't say that Thakur was qualified non-dualist or dualist or anything like that. And then he'll go right back and say, but everything comes from that one. So the one in Brahman. He'll give some of the very basic truths of Advaita Vedanta. There is a state of consciousness where the many disappears and the one as well. This is what I'm saying. For him, he saw everything in terms of the level of his consciousness, his state of awareness. If he says in that state of awareness this universe disappears, he won't conclude that this universe is false. Some do. They'll say, if it's real, it has to be real all of the time and always there. He doesn't come to that conclusion. He just says, my mind ascended to that realm where the universe disappears. And then comes back to the realm where the universe is there again. Only he sees it in a new light, that's all. So there's a state of consciousness where the many disappears and the one as well. So there's no feeling of I am Brahman in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's not there. There's only one. There's no I there. There's no cognitive thinking or anything like that. So we can't even talk about that I was merged in that state of oneness. There's nothing that can be said about it. Brahman alone exists. Even at that, we can't say anything about that state. So the one also exists. This is why they say that the term given for this Advaita Vedanta will have to be not oneness, but non-dual. So we're denying duality, but we won't even assert oneness because it's something beyond that. Oneness is relative to the one to the many. So something even beyond that. So there's a state of consciousness where the many disappears and the one as well. For the many must exist as long as the one exists. Brahman is without comparison. It is impossible to explain Brahman by analogy. It is between light and darkness. It is light, but not the light that we perceive, not material light. Okay, I want to talk about this because this is something very important. We sometimes think that if we understand these analogies, we've understood something. I can tell you personally that I have a very clear understanding of how the sun can be reflected in different containers of water, giving the appearance of many suns, but the sun not being affected. Perfectly clear to me, absolutely clear to me. Does that mean I have any understanding of how Brahman becomes the many? No. It's an illustration that helps to a very small degree. It helps us understand how something can appear to change but not really change. It helps us to understand if the container is the physical body and the mind is water, how this light of the sun can be reflected in it, and we see this. It can explain all of these things. But when we stop and think, but this light of the sun that I'm talking about, I am that. And now I say, how do I understand that I am that? That means this light is consciousness. I'm thinking of it as some physical light, which is reflected, and mind. What is mind? It's not water, that it can reflect the physical light of the sun. So how much do we gain something? Of course, it is helpful. These are helpful illustrations. But if we think that because we understand the illustration, we understand Brahman and the relationship between Brahman and this physical body and mind and all of that, we really don't. These are things that have to be experienced, and this is in vain that we reach for these types of analogies to help us a little bit to understand. So it is helpful. I'm not saying it's not helpful. When we talk about the mind being like a lake, and that there are ripples on the surface, and that there's sediment, and it gets roiled, and all of that. It helps us understand, but does it help us understand what is this mind that we're talking about? It's not water. Huh? So, so this is why Thakur says, it is light. One says Brahman is without comparison. Anupa. It is impossible to explain Brahman by analogy. It is between light and darkness. It is light, but not the light that we perceive, not material light. So that's probably the best analogy that we have. But this light of the sun has no awareness. It illumines things, but it has no awareness. This light of Brahman itself is pure consciousness, pure awareness. So it fails that way because there's no analogy that works. There's nothing in this physical universe that can explain how this Brahman either is the ground of the world, or creates the world, or dwells within the world, or functions as the self. There's no perfect type of analogy. Thakur, he says we have to understand what part of the analogy to accept as real and what part of it to accept as extraneous to it. You remember the example he gives? Say someone is comparing somebody to a tiger. He says, doesn't mean that they have a jaw that looks like a lantern. That's that shape. No, the agreement will be in one point, that they have that fierceness and boldness and everything, not on any of the other points. Having fur, having stripes, none of those other things. So we get a little bit from these types of examples of how the one can appear to be the many without changing, how it can be the source of illumination, how we can see a reflection of it and everything. But really, when we stop to think, we're trying to understand something that's awareness, that's consciousness. It's not a reflected light or anything like that. Then we realize how little we get, how much we get, and how little we get from these analogies.
So, Swami,
Yeah.
when we say today's imagination is tomorrow's reality, that too is limited.
This was an expression we hear it. Swami Turiyananda used to say this, that today's imagination is tomorrow's realization. That means that we try to posit an image of ourselves that we don't at present really feel, but which has some reality to it, and which if we practice that attitude, eventually we'll find out that it's true. Now this is done both in a dualistic sense and also in a non-dualistic sense, that this arop kora, that we adopt an attitude that I'm not the child of my biological parents, I'm the child of the Divine Mother. Now I say that, but I feel that, no, you ask me who my parents are, they're the ones who gave birth to me. I really feel that. But I have to keep telling myself, no, that the real self within me has a relationship, it comes from the Divine Mother in a real sense. So I try to impose that idea in my mind until one day I realize the truth of it. So the same thing, aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. That now I just have to kind of imagine what it's like, that it doesn't seem real to me. But practicing that again and again, one day I realize, oh, it is true. That's the absolute truth. It wasn't just imagination. I was imagining it, but what I was imagining was actually true. So if say someone has amnesia, there's a story about a king. He went into this forest and he fell down and he forgot who he was, got amnesia. And somebody came and saw him and recognized him, some yogi. And he said, or people said, no, I know you're the king. He said, I'm not the king. He woke up in the forest. He thought he was a hunter, something like that. So there's one man said, I'll tell you what you should do is dress like you're a king. Put on the clothes of the king and start to think, how would I act if I were the king? And what would I do? And how would I talk to people, this and that? And he did it long enough until one day he said, oh, now I remember I really am the king. So it was imagination, but it was true. He was imagining that he was a king, but he really was the king. So that kind of idea. That's an analogy that helps. The sun and the reflection. It's helpful, of course. It's one of the most helpful analogies that we have. But we shouldn't confuse understanding the analogy with understanding Brahman. They're two different things. Again, when God changes the state of my mind, when he brings my mind down to the plane of the relative, I perceive that it is he who has become all these, the creator, Maya, the living beings, and the universe. Now, again, is this a philosophical position? He says many times that Brahman has become all this. Now, there'll be philosophers who say that Brahman can't change into anything. And if Brahman changes into something, then does it change completely? Is it 10% of that becomes the universe? The rest remains. We have our, hymns and things that talk about this kind of thing. The 1/10 is this, like an iceberg, huh? 7/10 are below the surface or something, or 1/7 is above. Anyhow, I take this again as in that state of mind. This is the way he saw things and understood things. Sometimes they'll say that this Shakti Parinama, that the Brahman remains unchanged, but the Shakti changes. Or we can say that the Brahman is changing, but remaining the same at the same time. Different schools. He didn't care about these different schools. This was just, he had this experience and it was real for him and consistent with everything else. And this was his view of the world, that there'll be others, they come down from that state of samadhi. Everything is like a dream. Nothing seems very real. They're not too involved in anything. This is the eye of knowledge as opposed to the eye of devotion. So there'll be people who have different, even God realized souls will have a different view of things. So I perceive that it is he who has become all these. Or some will say that it is a Brahman appearing to be all this, but unchanged, really. So different experiences and different views and everything, not a philosophical truth. Thakur was very clear. So what is the philosophical truth about Brahman? It's a Brahman. Brahman itself is that. We have an individual. Everyone will describe that individual differently. What is the truth of that individual? The person, with every aspect that's there. Not the way I see that person or anybody else sees that person, but the person itself, Brahman itself. So what Brahman is, no one can say. What Brahman is like, what is Brahman like? Brahman, no analogy. What the ghee tastes like? Ghee tastes like ghee. Every time we always say that, there's seafood, all these things, it all tastes like chicken. Because it's the closest thing that we come to. But with Brahman, that's what he's saying. There's no analogy that really works. What is it like? It's not like anything else. We have two categories. One is this visible universe, which has billions and billions of different things in it. And the other is just unitary. There's no distinction within it, nothing within it. And yet, it has that hidden power to become all of this. They're not really two separate things. This is all Maya. This is my topic for Sunday. I'll be talking about this a little.
Swami,
Yeah.
These four aspects, Ishwar, Maya, Jiva, and Brahman, they are all the manifestation of Brahman as Shakti. Right?
Okay, let me see. Did we get to this? Okay. I perceive that it's he who has become all these. Okay. So the creator, Ishwara, Maya, the living beings, and the universe. He says, I see that it is he who has become all of these. Okay, now, so suppose we start out with a Brahman. That Brahman has become Ishwara. Not really. Brahman is called Ishwara when Brahman is functioning as the creator. This is like saying that the woman has become a mother when the child is born. It's not becoming a mother like becoming somebody else. It's the same person. They're one and the same. Then Maya. So that power by which the mother can give birth to a child, That also belongs to the same. So we have all in the same. The living beings. So this will be that the God manifests in the form of all beings, so that God is the only self within all beings, dwelling within all, and this universe, Virat. So this is Brahman as this visible universe. So they're all manifestations or projections. They're all connected with the Brahman somehow. They're all tied. There's no anything separate from that. And we give different descriptions. One is all projected out of Brahman. Some will say creation of Brahman. Some will say Brahman itself. Some will say false appearance. All different ways of understanding it. But what Thakur is saying is that there's a unity connecting all of this together. So Nirguna Brahman, Saguna Brahman. It's not that Saguna Brahman is a creation of Nirguna Brahman or projected out of it. They're one and the same. This is what Thakur says. It's the snake that's coiled up and the snake that's wriggling. They're not two different snakes. They're one and the same snake. When it's not moving, inactive, then you call it Brahman. When it's moving and everything, then we call it Shakti or Kali or Divine Mother or Ishvara or Saguna Brahman. But one and the same. Again, sometimes he shows me that he has created the universe. Okay, see, sometimes the universe is nothing but he, and other times that he has created the universe. These, for the philosophers, these are conflicting points of view. They'll argue. Either he created the universe, or he is the universe, or is a false appearance. But Thakur is saying that he has all of these different visions. And from that stand of whatever point of view he's looking at it from, it's true and real. This is beautiful. Again, sometimes he shows me that he has created the universe. Now, I don't like this he. It should really be she. Because in his mind, I'm sure, in his mind, he's thinking Divine Mother. The problem is in Bengali, it's the same word. There's no separate he and she. Huh? It's all she or tini. Huh? So there's no way of putting it into English to capture that the way it is in the Bengali. So sometimes he shows me that he has created the universe and all living beings. He is the master and the universe his garden. So all of these different relationships. Huh? This is why he was so fond of Hanuman's statement that you want to know what I think of you, Ram? It depends. Depends on what my state of mind at the time. When I feel this body to be real, then I'm your servant. That's all. When I feel a little bit closer, then I'm a part of you, and I can go into that state also, Rama. Don't forget it, where I understand that I am the self, and you and I are not different. We're one and the same. I can also go into that state. And Thakur loved that. So these are the three schools of Vedanta. They're all true and they're all real, in different points of view, and when the mind is in a different level of awareness. He is the master, and the universe and all its living beings belong to him. That is knowledge. And I am the doer. I am the guru. I am the father. That is ignorance. This is my house. This is my family. This is my wealth. These are my relatives. This also is ignorance. Now, why is it ignorance? Because the one thing that is insubstantial is this ego. And when we search for it, we understand that this consciousness, which is the real self, is impersonal. And this ego is nothing but an idea. And it's a false idea because we take that to be the ultimate reality. And yet it's constantly changing and it's constantly having its own moods and it's disappearing it sometimes and fooling us. And it's really the result of Maya. So if we understand that we're not that, then how can I be the owner of anything? Huh? If I'm not this ego. And if I'm not this ego, then either I am the witness or is God alone dwelling within. And if God alone is dwelling within, then everything belongs to God dwelling within, and every decision is made by God. There's also an attitude. I don't think we have to try to get too philosophical with some of these things. I think it's a mistake sometimes that I say that I'm the instrument and God is the operator. Mother is the operator. I do what she makes me do. Thakur could say that. We can't say that. We get all confused because this I is there. I'm not going to say the Divine Mother is making me say something when I know that I'm doing it on my own. Now, it may be one day I'll get that realization that even when I was immersed in ignorance, it was Mother making me do everything. Maybe. But Thakur says, as long as I'm not in that state, I have to take responsibility for what I do. Later, if I have that realization, that's a different story. So this is my house. This is my family. This is my wealth. These are my relatives. This also is ignorance. Balaram's father. That is true, sir. They like all of these ideas, but not from this same point of view, and not so much that this I is something unreal, but this I is a humble servant of God, or taking any one of the relationships that we find in this Krishna Lila, looking upon God as the child and everything. Master. As long as you do not feel that God is the master, you must come back to the world. You must be born again and again. There will be no rebirth when you can truly say, O God, thou art the master. As long as you cannot say, O Lord, thou alone art real, you will not be released from the life of the world. Now, real and unreal, these are loaded terms. They're highly controversial terms. What do we mean by unreal? That there'll be a whole range. There'll be some who will say that it's absolutely unreal, that it's like a mirage in the desert. You go to find it and you see that there's nothing but sand there. It's just completely in your imagination. Then there'll be some who will say that no, it's actually real, but it's temporary and it's vanishing. And there's some who say that even if it's permanent, it has no real substance to it. That only that which is unchanging is ultimately real. There'll be all different ways of understanding this. But the reality of Brahman, or the reality of God, is of a different nature than this. Whatever this is, it's a relative reality, empirical. It's perceivable. But what it is in itself, we have no idea. We know it only as it comes through the senses and is understood by the mind. That's all. So it doesn't have that same reality as the self, which is undeniable. I know that I am. I know that I'm aware. I don't know how it happened or all the ramifications of it, but you can't tell me that I don't exist. You can tell me that this body is a dream body. I can say it's possible. I may wake up and say, yes, it was a dream body, but you can't tell me I don't exist. I won't accept that. I know that. That even a madman knows that he exists, and he's 100% right, even if he thinks that he exists as Napoleon or as the king of something, some complete delusion. But the fact of existence can't be denied. This going and coming, this rebirth is inevitable. There will be no liberation. Further, what can you achieve by saying, it is mine? The manager of an estate may say, this is our garden, these are our couches and furniture. Now, they were big landlords. They had property in the different places, in Orissa and other places. So the wealthy people. So this will go straight to the heart of Balaram's father. Of course, he was a good person. He was a good person. And they had a little place in Vrindavan also. And I'm sure that they felt that everything belonged to Krishna. They were that type of devotee, the Vaishnava devotee. The manager of an estate may say, this is our garden. These are our couches and furniture. But when he is dismissed by the master, he hasn't the right to take away even a chest of worthless mango wood given to him for his use. And we're all going to be fired from this world one day when we depart this world. And we won't take anything with us. So this applies to everyone. The feeling of I and mine has covered the reality. So this is an ego sense that I am so and so, and these things belong to me, I and mine. Now he's talking this real Advaita Vedanta to him. Because of this, we do not see truth. Attainment of Chaitanya, divine consciousness, is not possible without the knowledge of Advaita, non-duality. After realizing Chaitanya, one enjoys Nityananda, eternal bliss. One enjoys the bliss after attaining the state of a Paramahamsa. This is all plays on words of the three main actors, we can say, in this Chaitanya Lila. Advaita was Advaitacharya. So it's just by accident that he had that name. Not that he was an Advaitin. He wasn't. He was a real devotee of Krishna. He was really the one who started the whole movement. It wasn't Chaitanya Deva. Chaitanya Deva was very much against all of these people. This led by Advaitacharya and others, they would have kirtan in the streets, and he would go and make fun of them and everything, and they would avoid him. They were afraid of him and everything. So he was really the precursor of this whole kirtan movement and everything. And then Chaitanya Dev himself, and Nityananda. Nityananda was, we can say, his disciple but companion also, and the most important companion, most important figure next to Chaitanya Deva. They talk about them as two brothers. They weren't biological brothers, but as if brothers. Tara Dubhai. So many songs about that. So it's a very nice play on these three names, the name of Advaita. So Thakur says, attainment of Chaitanya. So the name of Chaitanya, Chaitanya Deva. But now he's talking about the attainment of God realization. He said divine consciousness. Not possible without the knowledge of Advaita. Now, the knowledge of Advaita doesn't mean this universe is a dream. Dismiss it. It means this oneness. It means there's oneness, that we can take it even the followers of Ramanuja, they believe in oneness. Even the dualists, there's a certain type of oneness that the whole universe comes out of Brahman itself, like the sparks coming out of a fire. So still, that fire is the one real thing, but everything comes out, it has its relative reality for a certain period of time. So this idea of oneness is really common to all of the schools of Vedanta. The one difference will be with Sankhya. And even there's a connection. They're not really two separate categories, Prakriti Purusha. There's a connection between them. So he has to talk about knowledge of Advaita, because otherwise the play on words won't work, because his name was Advaitacharya. And after realizing Chaitanya, one enjoys Nityananda. So his name just happened to mean that eternal bliss. So one enjoys this bliss after attaining the state of a Paramahamsa. The Paramahamsas were God-realized souls who just wandered with perfect freedom, not bound by any traditions or rules or anything, even to have to wear a certain cloth or do anything. They're 100% free. And Thakur himself, we refer to him as a Paramahamsa, because he didn't care about taking the Garba cloth and following these strict rules and going barefoot and vegetarian, or all of these different things. He didn't bother about any of that. So the Paramahamsa is beyond, free, beyond all of these things. They say Shukadeva was a good example of Paramahamsa. Just wandered freely, no attachment to anything, even to a connection with any sampradaya or whatever. Even though there is a kind of Paramahamsa sampradaya, but still. Okay, now we get this very interesting statement. Vedanta does not recognize the incarnation of God. We've had this before, huh? Did we discuss this before? Okay, now, what does this mean? Vedanta does not recognize the incarnation of God. Sometimes Thakur says also the incarnation is for the bhakta, not for the jnani. When Thakur uses this term, Vedanta, what is he referring to? Generally, the Upanishads. The Upanishads. When we use the term Vedanta in its largest sense. It includes all the schools. So the followers of Madhva and Ramanuja, they're equally Vedantists, and they, of course, accept the avatar. Now, when we use Vedanta, even in the sense of darshan, one of the six darshanas, it includes Gita as well as Upanishads. Gita, of course, everything is about his avatar. So Thakur, he means specifically Upanishads, almost always when he says Vedanta, and specifically Advaita Vedanta, in the most formal sense. Now, there can be Advaitins who accept this avatar. There's no reason not to, but there was no concept of the avatar at the time of the Upanishads. Swamiji says we can find the seed for these things there. And the fact that it's not in the Upanishads doesn't mean that it's made up or it's not real. Another great statement of Swamiji is that spiritual truths get discovered in time, and there may be some still to be discovered in the future. Because before the time of, who was it? Newton, the law of gravity? Sir Isaac Newton. Yeah, did things not fall according to that law? Huh? Yeah, but nobody knew what was at work there or what the rate of acceleration was or anything like that. So the same thing with the avatar. So Vedanta, so that means in the Upanishads, we don't find this incarnation of God according to it. So now according to it, this will be more this Advaita Vedanta idea. Say we read Vivek Chudamani. Say according to it, Chaitanya Deva is only a bubble of the non-dual Brahman. Swamiji also talks like that. He says Christ and Buddha were only great waves on this ocean of consciousness. But that makes a difference. That makes a difference. Even if we accept that, then every once in a while there'll be a huge wave that comes. This is the avatar. Huge wave that leaves a tremendous impression on the world, changes everything, and that gives us a glimpse of the power of the ocean by seeing that wave. This is why Thakur sometimes said the avatar is like the hole through which you see that infinite field on the other side. So even as avatar, we have so many different ways of understanding it. We take the one that's most helpful for us. If somebody says, no, the avatar, it means that Vishnu descended from heaven and took a form for a certain period of time and then went back up again. I say, I don't believe that. So does that mean that I can't have any concept of the avatar? No, we can have our own understanding of it. So Swamiji used to say, don't insist that anybody look upon Sri Ramakrishna in any one particular way. Let them understand them according to their own light. Of course, we make a little distinction about the avatar not having in karma, is ever perfect, and coming with a special spiritual mission and everything, not just the degree of power. Other distinctions are there, but this is one way of looking at it. This is why Thakur said to Swamiji, when I tell you he was Krishna and he was Rama, I don't mean it in your Vedantic sense, that everybody, because he used to say, I see all of you are Rama himself. All the men who are assembled in the room, whether you know it or not, you're all Rama. He said, I don't mean it in that sense, in the sense in which anybody can say it. I mean it in a special sense. Do you know what the vision of divine consciousness is like? It is like the sudden illumination of a dark room when a match is struck. So this means that it's instantaneous and all-encompassing. We may have look upon everything as a gradual ascension to the roof, but once we get there, it'll be wow. It'll be just all overpowering once we get there. So the very nice illustration. It's like sudden illumination of a dark room when a match is struck. The incarnation of God is accepted by those who follow the path of bhakti. A woman belonged to the Karta Bhaja sect, observed my condition and remarked, the Karta Bhaja sect, these were kind of Vaishnava sects that also like this Madhur Bhava, this Radha Krishna stuff, and their habits weren't so good because they engaged in taking of wine and other things. But Thakur, he would go to, because the Vaishnava Charan was involved with all this, he went with them a few times to these different places. He said, this is also a path, and don't go there, but it's also a path. So a woman belonging to the Karta Bhaja sect, see, Karta Bhaja, they didn't care too much for these gods and goddesses, but Karta is the guru. They were more this like this Ladon Fakir, huh? And this what did he call it? The Shai, but this the Manush, huh? What was it? Monia Manush, the man of my heart. That's the guru, who's also thought of the guru. The man of his heart is also thought of God dwelling within. So they prefer to worship God through the guru, the karta, guru and bhaja, and Monia Manush. So a woman belonging to the Karta Bhaja sect observed my condition and remarked, you have inner realization. Don't dance and sing too much. Ripe grapes must be preserved carefully in cotton. The mother-in-law lessens her daughter-in-law's activities when the daughter-in-law is with child. Let me see. Oh, this is all her quote. So, yeah, Thakur, that's interesting. So this illustration of the daughter-in-law with child comes from this one woman from the Kartavaja sect. I never noticed that before. So this is all her statement. You have inner realization. Don't dance and sing too much. Ripe grapes must be preserved carefully in cotton. This is also what Keshav said. He said, you don't know what precious treasure you have in Sri Ramakrishna. He should be preserved like that with these grapes, that if you just let it rest on the ground or something, it'll get bruised. It should be kept very carefully, preserved that way. The mother-in-law lessens her daughter-in-law's activities when the daughter-in-law is with child. One characteristic of God realization is the activities of a man with such realization gradually drop away. Inside this man, meaning Sri Ramakrishna, is the real jewel. So she could recognize him. Different people recognize Thakur. It's very interesting that Quaker, Mishra, I don't know what his full name was, that he said to all of them there, you don't realize who this is, this Sri Ramakrishna. I see he's Jesus himself come back in this form. And then he recognized him as the avatar. And he said, you don't even appreciate. So people from different traditions sometimes could see him that way. Watching me eat, she remarked, sir, are you yourself eating, or are you feeding someone else? So where's the sense of I? Huh? Are you identified with that divine of self within, who is alone exists there? Or is it the divine mother who dwells within you, who's feeding you? This is that same thing that Thakur, he would go back and forth sometimes. He said, what is this confusion, mother? Am I feeding you, or are you feeding me? That sometimes I see mother and child are both there. Sometimes only mother is there. What is this confusion? Mine would go slightly different levels and everything. So sometimes he may feel that, yes, I'm doing everything as an offering to mother dwelling within. Sometimes he would feel, I'm just this machine. Mother's the one who's feeding me. Well, different ways of looking at it. She was very insightful, this woman. The feeling of ego has covered the truth. Narendra once said, as the eye of man receives, he's quoting Narendra, See, this God realized soul is quoting this teenage boy. As the eye of man recedes, the eye of God approaches. Kedar says, the more clay there is in the jar, the less water it holds. Krishna said to Arjuna, brother, you will not realize me if you possess even one of the 8 siddhis. These give only a little power. With the healing and the like, one may do only a little good to others. Isn't that true? Therefore, I pray to the Divine Mother for pure love only, a love that does not seek any return. I never asked for occult powers. While talking thus, Sri Ramakrishna went into samadhi. it almost seems that uh, he would do it just as the final level of the point that he wanted to make. Uh, that now I've told everything that I have to tell. If they see that there's God realization is something real, then they'll understand what I've been talking about. I don't believe it was a pre-planned thing or anything, but it seems to be how the whole thing worked for some reason. That this would be the way it would happen. While talking thus, Ramakrishna went into samadhi. He sat there motionless, completely forgetful of the outer world. Then, coming down to the sense world, he sang, "Ah, friend, I've not found him yet, whose love has driven me mad." At the master's request, Ramlal sang a song describing how Chaitanya embraced the monastic life. We'll stop here. There's a very famous song. This is part of that Nimai Sannyas that, at least in Bengal, when they do these things, everyone is in tears. This is highly emotional because he's leaving behind his mother, who lost all of her children, and it's a very sad type of thing. So we'll stop here. That's on page 309. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanugam Bhatatu Vikraham Vai Yashavataram Bharameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.